All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Decentralization Past, Present, and Future panel. I think that's the last session of the day, except for the ZF Club wrap up afterwards. I'm Andrew. I'm a board member of the Zcash Foundation. I also do security research in the rest of my time, especially focused on things related to trusted hardware. Used to do a lot of research on blockchains and zero knowledge proofs as well. I'm joined by a great panel here. I think we're going to have Matt Green. I think he's not here right now, but going to show up spontaneously through this. Oh wow, perfect. I just summoned Matt Green. You join. I was just going to briefly introduce you and then introduce you to the rest. So um, we're only in on time at the intro here, but Matt was one of the founding scientists of Zcash, had been a board member of Zcash Foundation for quite a long time until recently, does research at Johns Hopkins University and has been an advisor to a bunch of blockchain companies, maybe most relevant Aleo in the blockchain space. Also Dismad from ZecHub, and so a longtime contributor to Zcash and one of the grant recipients, and also Andrew Arnott, who has also been the active Zcash member, also recently a recipient of Zcash grants back when they were the minor grants for his integration effort. Also has interacted with Zcash community grants a whole bunch on wallet topics and expressed some opinions on proof of stake that I'm looking forward to talking about. I guess you can reintroduce yourselves when I get to your questions. And to just kind of blast past like the super brief intro to you all, but yeah, we have 90 minutes, so I think this can be kind of a loose conversation. I hope to go through the decentralization viewpoint, but go back to some of the other topics that have already come up in a bunch of ZCon sessions. I will try to ask some questions to start out kind of, philosophically on the nature of decentralization and what it means for, you know, I guess, relevant decisions and unique things for Zcash. I mean, there's at least a few different facets of decentralization, so it's not like we have to just talk about one, but there's decentralization at the governance layer, including the, larger organizations that do core development in Zcash, but also the distribution of resources. Obviously, more users and more distribution of currency counts towards decentralization. We get to look at and compare Zcash maybe to some observations that we'll have made about other cryptocurrencies that also have to deal with tension between, say, decentralization and other goals. I think a couple of remarks is like a framing question, and I'll get to passing it around to you all. But decentralization is really interesting for Zcash because decentralization is one of the most core foundational values for blockchains and cryptocurrencies throughout the ecosystem. Zcash, of course, is unique for privacy, but I think Zcash's path and trajectory towards decentralization too, not just due to privacy, are also really unique and extremely strong. I think Zcash for its size and rank among cryptocurrencies, has one of the most decentralization in a bunch of aspects. I know this quote was mentioned, I think, at several Zcons because it's old now, and I already heard it mentioned before, but I really like the quote from Chris Furniske on, any network that is going to progressively decentralize, which is a really common meme throughout the cryptocurrency ecosystem, but it's going to have to, walk these similar difficult paths that Zcash has. This was back in the context of, I think, the first dev fund, and there have been several iterations of ongoing structural decisions like that for Zcash. Of course, that's just only one facet of decentralization. I think another comment that was mentioned earlier in some panels has been, well, really just remarking about the strength of Zcash's decentralization in terms of how much important work, infrastructure work is broadly being done by non-early, non-insider teams, but community and independent teams, ranging from Ketit to things that Zcash community grants members have done in terms of software development. So yeah, I hope through this to talk about some of the get your all's inputs on some of the trade-offs between decentralization and other goals. I had always thought that decentralization and privacy would eventually come to be more in tension, and I think that that's really not been the case for Zcash. It's been fairly like maxed on both really excellent grade privacy as well as both state of the art and continually renewing and fighting for decentralization at many of its layers. If anything, I think the relevant tension today is, do we have too much decentralization in terms of conflicting or not perfectly coherent focus between different teams and limited resource allocation. So I do think that there's an inherent tension between decentralization and, say, singular cohesive product focus that is kind of challenging. So yeah, I've talked a bunch. I imagine roughly going in the order of some discussion about past and then about comparing with other currencies or other systems, other blockchains in the ecosystem, say, and then maybe focus on some of the other, say, Zcash dilemmas or difficult decision to makes that are now as the future component. Okay, so let me switch there and say, maybe Matt, I'll call on you first. Do you want to for any introduction you want to add that I didn't cover, or start us off with any, say, to start with, remark on, philosophically, how should we view decentralization in contrast with other goals in Zcash?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, no, your introduction is great. I mostly spend a lot of my time trying to learn about what people are doing nowadays all over the place. And so, speaking of decentralization, I was out at ETH Denver last week. Was it last week? Yeah, I think it was last week. And wow, that was weird. So I learned kind of two interesting things. And one of them is that nobody cares about decentralization anymore, which makes me incredibly sad. And so, I'm sort of overplaying that a little bit, but I want to, by nobody, I mean nobody being like the kinds of people who attend ETH Denver and are excited about investing in things, which are a lot of the people I ran into. So the biggest thing is, the biggest party that I went to was for Base, the blockchain Base, Coinbase's blockchain, which is, like hyper centralized. And they were bragging about how they got block times down to like milliseconds and it's incredibly good. And I mean, it is incredibly good if the metric you care about is like really, really, really fast and, Ethereum. But it is not great if you care about decentralization. So the question you might ask is like, why do I care about decentralization? If I get great blockchain block times, and people might even say the regulatory environment that would make us need decentralization is even getting less important. And I think we're going to learn a rough lesson on that, but it might take a couple of years. When I look at Base, what I see is Coinbase building a customer base of people who are using their blockchain who think it's free and wonderful. And eventually they are going to find a way to squeeze those people. They're going to start looking at those transactions and they're going to say, well, this transaction, this $1 million transaction you're doing on our blockchain for like relatively small amounts of fees, suddenly we want to find some way to extract from that. And so that's just one argument for decentralization that I think is something people should pay attention to. The other interesting thing I learned, I'm sorry, I'll stop babbling about this. The other interesting thing I learned from someone I know who is, kind of in the more advanced crypto banking sector was that a lot of folks are, when I talked about specifically privacy, the answer they said is we don't really need privacy on chain anymore. That's not an issue. We're not worried about the limitations of chains because now everybody is putting their money into these centralized omnibus wallets. And so privacy comes from the fact that like you're passing into these centralized services which give you your privacy, kind of like a dark pool, but like hyper centralized and not private from whoever's operating it. And everyone is very happy with that. And kind of the extended version of that story is that the centralized services have now gotten to the point where they're now just bypassing chains and just directly talking to each other through private APIs, which was an incredibly depressing story to hear, but like interesting to hear about. So, I am not a believer, like I am not a believer in that. And I think at the end of the day, the vision of decentralization should be about more than just like what's, like how many nodes are we running? Like, I think there are real reasons for decentralization, and we're going to find this out. Unfortunately, I think we're going to find it out in a touching a hot stove kind of way over the next couple, 3, 4 years. Anyway, those are my thoughts right now.
Do you think that anything's shifted in terms of, I mean, I see the whole ecosystem as switching to saying, well, we need to be competitive, not just on our strong values and building decentralization and privacy for that matter, other good attributes that are good for us, and even like, risk averse. It's about preparing so we don't encounter, this, terrible future where there's such a terrible cracked up. We find out just how decentralization we are too late when we need it. That's kind of the, prediction there. Have things shifted though with, I guess, other, projects now shifting the Overton window, I guess I would say. Like I've also been surprised at, I guess, the lack of pushback throughout that's been happening over several years, so not entirely new, but it's kind of yeah, relevant to this.
Yeah, I think there has been a little bit of a shift, right? Like I think the Ethereum in particular and projects like Zcash, they're the kind of like first guard after Bitcoin. Really pushed hard on decentralization. We sort of just took those as values, and Ethereum has been pushing hard in their own weird Ethereum way to do decentralization as well. And I think that, now you see the Solanas of the world, which isn't super centralized, but more centralized, and the bases of the world coming in and saying, look, what's important is that we just make everything work fast. And that's definitely been a shift. Um, I don't know what to do about that. It makes me a little bit sad, but I definitely see it happening. It is what happens to the internet, right? Like the internet, we used to value all these websites and decentralized everything's, and then now, like we've got Facebook and we've got Google and we've got what else do we have? I don't know, maybe Amazon and like Microsoft. So like there's, everything centralized because it was efficient. The danger here, I think, is the same thing we learned on the internet, right? Which is that the minute you hand all of your life and your business and your platform over to these small numbers of hyper centralized companies or centralized chains, eventually they find a way to make you regret it. So we'll see the find out part of that.
Andrew, do you want to jump in here and react at all? You might link this
Yeah.
to things I imagine you might yeah, well, take it away.
So I like a lot of what Matt said. There's a lot of different aspects to decentralization, right? There's the dev team. There's the blockchain and the miners and whether people can do repeat spend attacks. And there's political decentralization, both in the sense of multiple nationalities being represented so that if one nation decides to be unfavorable toward privacy, that doesn't spell the doom of Zcash. I am delighted to hear that there's several different countries, and some countries seem to be running with Zcash more than even the US, which is great. Doesn't spell so much good for the US. I'd love to see us catch up, but it's great that there's multiple anchors in different countries. Then there's political views in the decentralization. What are we hoping to accomplish with Zcash? What ideas do we espouse? The Monero community, for example, seems fairly sharp in some of their intent, and they're giving the finger to government, et cetera, which I'm personally not a fan of that. But Zcash has its own relatively sharp bend on, and when I say Zcash, of course, I don't mean the protocol, right? That's the free, agnostic, everything, which is one of the principles we believe in. But my impression has been we could improve in the decentralization of political opinions in some cases. As far as source code goes, let me back up and just say my impression from the community, like the external community, is that Zcash gets a bad rap for being too centralized. And I think that's, to some extent, it's misinformed and unfortunate. In another angle, though, it's true, and maybe it's not a bad thing. And so we can communicate that with people better, perhaps. Zcash is very innovative, and that innovation costs a lot of money. The Electric Coin Company and the Zcash Foundation and through Zcash community grants, but I'm thinking particularly the ECC, and I hope that's a fair attribution, like Orchard Pool, Sapling Pool, those things have never been created for free before. And we're in this weird ecosystem in cryptocurrencies where people feel like the only cryptocurrencies you can trust are the open source distributed ones. And yet the true innovation comes from organizations that act more like, at least they resemble capitalist systems. Like ECC is a nonprofit. It's an LLC underneath Freeboot or Bootstrap, which is a nonprofit, which is great. But they're looking for funding now because we've done lockboxes on the rewards, right? It puts them in a challenging position because they're innovating in a way that would self-interest in a free market economy would typically drive, but they're not getting paid for what they're doing. It's a really challenging time that we're in, and there's some tension between being decentralized as a result to appeal to the community and a temporary centralization and reward system, which people are like, oh, the rewards, Miners aren't decentralized. All the rewards are going to one or a few entities. Yeah, but there's a lot of value coming from that right now. And so I'm with Matt that we want to be decentralized. We want to be more decentralized than we are. Also, there's always trade-offs, which you can't escape from those. The source code, in my opinion, is one of the hardest things, though. Like I'm comfortable with the reward system. I would change things a little bit if it were me, but it's okay. The source code is hard because it's got to be reliable, it's audited, etc. But ECC, I'll very shortly say it's probably underfunded, and they could use a lot more engineers, very, very talented engineers. They've got a few of them, but they could probably make do with 4 times as many. But that would be more centralized. So how do we solve that? What should be? I'll stop talking for now, but that's an area where there's a lot
What do you
of
think about
trade-offs.
what do you think about the evolution so far then of I guess at the source code layer? I assume at the source code you then mean kind of at the core developer competency, like who is able to maintain and evolve the source code to where
Yes. I mean,
um
strictly speaking, the protocol is documented and anybody could write similar source code or fork it and build it. On Bitcoin, that works really well because Bitcoin hardly innovates anymore. And I hope I'm not offending
mhm.
people. Like, I know they've got new
You're
addresses,
proud of it.
right? But relatively speaking, it's pretty stagnant. And that was Satoshi's vision, that it wasn't actually going to evolve. Whereas Zcash, we have a very, very different vision. And when you have an evolving, not only an evolving code base, but one that is built on such very deeply theoretical things like ZK proofs, there might be, I don't know how many people in the world that are qualified to do ZK proof programming, but it might be in the dozens. Certainly not me. I'm a great software developer and I'd love to fork the code and get a lot more changes into the Zcash ecosystem that I'm able to stick in through the Electric Coin Company and their code reviews and their overloaded workloads. PRs sadly don't move very quickly in those code bases. And yet, if I fork it and do my own thing, I don't know ZK proofs. And so I'm going to have to merge from them, which means I have to keep my code base very, very similar to them so that I can merge and not know what that code does. That's not great. That's basically counter to decentralization, but I don't know how to make that better.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, a bunch of others in the ecosystem have, learned zero knowledge proof. So it's yeah, it's a small number of people who can maintain a ZK proof circuit. But somewhat growing, at least in part due to Zcash helping and projecting, I think, educational materials and being open such that people learn the technology behind these and that kind of skill as well. I guess I think of the like pivot from Zcash D to Zebra is really notable because of it being a refactoring in a sense. The plan is then still to leave the zero knowledge proof implementation from the ECC library, but at least yeah, I mean, the whole world of the rest of the code base of the peer-to-peer networking stuff is at least probably still a small number of people that can do it. Also still, pretty slow to change in Bitcoin and other things as well. But it's I guess some modularity point and some evidence of being able then to, rotate developer personnel even in terms of who can maintain it. But yeah, it's a point taken. Even in that case, still concentrated on one implementation of all of the critical ZK proofs, and still not too many, core devs compared to the, range of other infrastructure tasks that could be taken on. I feel like I should call on Dismad next. Do you want to jump in and react to any of the things so far, or yeah, pivot to a different question?
Me, sorry, yeah. Just Matt.
Oh
Okay,
no, I called
sorry.
on
No, no.
Dismad. I meant to
Yeah,
call
yeah,
on
sorry. I
Dismad.
heard Matt. Please.
He also didn't unmute immediately, so I wonder if he's stuck.
Oh,
Oh, there you
sorry
are.
about that, guys.
There you go.
So yeah, I think I agree with Andrew's point that because Zcash is super state of the art in terms of what it involves to learn it, I think that naturally makes it centralized in the sense that in order to understand it, like he said, there's only a few people that learn it or that can really use it. Because like as an educator, like there's different ways of understanding something. You could read something and say, okay, I get the gist, but can I use it? That's a whole separate way of learning, I think. And I think Zcash needs more folks using it, and because it's hard to use, there's a problem there, and it tends to centralize just naturally. Another thought I had with Matthew's point with the ETH conference, yeah, I think there's a tendency to centralize because it's easier, and folks I don't know. I come from a background in the automotive industry, which is kind of completely outside of crypto. And there's a big push right now for electric vehicles, right? And I just think there's a parallel between the older, key cars versus the newer electronic cars, and it sort of centralizes, right? Because everything is all the electrical cars are more, in some sense, more centralized, and the older cars are more decentralized. But we're moving away from that, and I guess the question is that the direction we want to go? I think there's an interesting parallel there between what's happening in the automotive industry and the Zcash, or even the crypto industry in a whole. But part of it, like as a core contributor of ZCub, I really encourage full node usage because it accomplishes multiple things at the same time. It forces you to learn the software because you have to learn it to use it. And once you know how to use it, you can start thinking about applications and how it can benefit the network. And then my last point is socially, I think this problem is all about social consensus. And because really decentralized systems are hard, there's a natural friction, and we tend to move towards a centralized direction. But I think we should try to avoid that if we can, and encourage that. And sometimes I feel like the incentives are the opposite because of reasons.
Do you think anyone does a good job at I guess, training core developers, or that's the other way that I would think of? I mean, they don't have to be at odds with each other, except it's just, limited resources to do both. But you either focus on abstracting everything away, it's good for users, but then you never get to see how it works, and you have no chance at, creating new core developers by making it visible, or you make everything DIY friendly and like modular disassemblable laptop. Yeah, like an old version of a car that you're supposed to be able to disassemble and put back together. And I mean, you can always do both. You can always, have something that you can run yourself, run a full node easily, but then, also make services that are fast and user convenient so you don't have to. But certainly with like a limited developer focus there, those are
Yeah, I
important.
mean, I think having that option is the critical thing. But as we tend to move away from what's hard to what's easy, will that knowledge get lost is the question, because no one cares anymore. And to Matthew's point, like if something, I feel like we've been relatively lucky of bad things happening on a wide scale. But if something does happen, are we really ready? And that's what scares me. That's a very good point that he brought up.
Matt, can I just call on you again? I think you were ready to say something when I was calling on Disman.
Oh, no. I was just totally misunderstanding who you were calling out. Yeah, I guess I didn't really talk about decentralizing engineering, and I think that's a really hard problem. That's a really hard problem that's been a mess and difficult for Zcash for a long time. So I think that is kind of a tough one. I wish I had a great answer for it. I don't think anybody has found the answer for it, but I am interested that it's, yeah, especially with the lockbox discussion, that was particularly interesting. So anyway, that's all.
I think we could. I don't remember if
Right.
Andrew said this or if Disma said this, but I think we could do better if the electric coin company. I know we've got lots of different crates. It's hard to manage them all, and the only crates that I know of that are shared by the community that actually have kind of a complete story is like Librest Zcash. That's a fairly opinionated crate, which is one of the reasons why it's hard to get code changes into. And if the app you're trying to build doesn't fit the mold, it's not a good fit. And so if more value was packed into more distributed, unopinionated crates so that you could pick and choose and fork just smaller bits of the code, that could go a long way. Right now, we're in a world where most of the crates are in one repo. Like the one repo builds several of them, and they evolve so lockstep with each other, that often the cargo files have, they pin specific versions instead of releases. We're not treating this code as independently shippable bits. And just that discipline might go a long way to helping people be confident in forking or consuming them in different combinations, which could help with innovation and thereby decentralization. I want to throw this out though. I'm going to throw a left curveball. Decentralization, we talk about it, and I think myself included, a lot of us feel good about waving the decentralization flag and championing that, and how dare you, but centralization absolutely has its purposes, and it's better at certain things. And it's interesting to consider in a world where Zcash doesn't reward people anymore. If the reward system, which was originally touted to, hey, we're rewarding miners, and that goes down over time, and we're sending money to these various organizations that do the development. If that's going to go away sometime, who's going to find the security bugs? Who's going to drive this forward and improve scalability, et cetera? Cryptocurrency is still relatively young, right? It's been around for almost 2 decades, I suppose. And some cryptocurrencies manage to innovate a lot without a funding mechanism like Zcash has. I'm really interested in how that can happen for Zcash going forward. I wonder if we're kind of hooked on the bottle, and we need to take the bottle away from the baby to find out, hey, just how mature is our community, and how much do people care? Are they willing to just buy stock in the idea by holding Zcash and then spending their free time developing it? It's an interesting problem, but I wonder if we shouldn't. There might be some benefit, basically, in identifying which areas. I think Dismat touched on this too. Maybe centralization isn't something to run away from for certain aspects for now. And if we were open and honest about that, then we wouldn't be pretending like this is a bad trade-off and we're going to try to solve it. No, we're embracing this. This is the roadmap. This is the 10, 15-year roadmap for Zcash. And at this stage, this is the best approach, and this is why we're going to be centralized, and that's okay.
It seems at least plausible to me that Zcash, could do that, even through something as obviously, Zcap centric, because that's always on my mind. But I could even imagine, a decentralized process that ultimately accepts some kind of centralized, sprint, or even, this is one of the outcomes for the lockbox, is that it ends up getting pointed towards, one thing, one singular thing at the, at expressing the choice of, no fragmenting the resources on several half-assed things, but instead, consolidate, focus on one. Yeah, especially if temporary, it's not entirely inconsistent with decentralization, and certainly it's only at one aspect. That may be one way to do something very consolidated. It doesn't, or very effective by being cohesive, and it doesn't have to be at the expense of all other facets of decentralization.
We talk about consensus of the community. There's no such thing. Consensus, right. I think the definition would require 100% agreement. That's never, ever going to happen on an interesting project that interests millions of people, right? So what do we have instead? We've got majority, maybe a strong majority, but majority rule historically has bad outcomes for the people in the minority. And so as a group of societies, we tend to create governments, and really good ones, at least the ones that I like to espouse, aren't purely democratic. They're constitutional republics, so that the rights of the minority are also protected. And when you talk about a pure decentralized cryptocurrency, you're not getting rid of the leaders. You're just transitioning them from elected people to the talent that's driving the software, right? Bitcoin innovation is not decentralized. There's a very few people, few enough that one of those Satoshi impersonators felt that they could sue them and try to get them to force them to do software development changes. But if 5 or 6 Bitcoin committers wanted to do something, they would, and the community would probably take it, right? It's very centralized, but we didn't vote for these people. And if Zcash takes over the world, which I'd love to see, right? Am I more comfortable with a few developers that are really, really good at ZK proofs, but maybe aren't such good politicians as far as thinking about what everybody needs. Is that a better world than a world where Zcash was controlled by an elected body? And I know we've got Zcap, and we can talk about that if you want. I've got my concerns about how Zcap works.
I will definitely go back to that just as a way of blocking myself off from yammering too much about it. But okay, I will ask another question to Dismod first, and I think I'll ask the same question to Matt. But I'm interested, Dismod, in your suggestion along the forms of like what should Zcash be doing that it's not doing right now, especially to support performers receiving ZCGs or say other community development groups in the ecosystem. What do you think could be done better, basically?
Unmute. Sorry. I think largely we're headed in the right direction from my perspective. Because when I and ultimately the issue isn't what we're doing, it's that we're not doing it with enough magnitude, for lack of a better word. I'll throw in an analogy. We're a 3-cylinder car when we need to be 8 cylinders. And I think Andrew touched on this earlier, that ECC seems to have some top engineers in the world, and that's great, but they need more. And so I think if we really want to capitalize, we need to do more of what we're already doing. So when I first started in this community 4 years ago, like I felt like I was kind of nervous getting into the eco, but slowly over time, I was able to, in a decentralized way, learn the system and become a very high contributing member. So I think there's a success there. And I also think with the lockbox coming up, that's further proof that Zcash is definitely getting more decentralized. And that doesn't even touch the movement from ZCG going to FPF, right? So there's a lot of success here, and I think we shouldn't underplay that. I just think that we need to double down and find folks that are like-minded and increase what we're already doing.
All right, Matt. Same question, especially, I think you've gotten a chance to cool down for a while after getting to step down from the Zcash board and probably have. Yeah, I mean, you already showed some of your, comparative views, but anything along the lines of, something specific that Zcash should be doing now, your advice like that?
Yeah, I mean, I really like being on the board, and it's also been really nice letting other people do the job of being on the board. So both of those things, and that's made it so that I'm a little less in touch with, kind of the detailed decisions of what's going on in terms of grants and so on. But I think that when I was on the board, the best things that we did were like, in particular, like grants that like build up capability, right? Like anytime you build up capability, you get people excited and like they're actually able to do things. That helps enormously. And like the biggest problem we have in Zcash is a community between like ECC and the foundation is there's just not enough capability. There are a million excited, enthusiastic people out there, but like they don't know how to get into the system. And maybe this is now being repaired, but they don't know how to get into the system, and it's hard to keep them in there. And it's just agonizingly painful. I don't really have any great concrete suggestion on how to do it, but I enjoyed like every now and then we had a real success. We got someone to build something and stick it out for a while, and it was great. So hopefully somebody will have a better solution to keeping that going than I do right now.
Are there other, I mean, similar size ecosystems that you see doing a good job of this? Was something that we should learn, specifically, addressing, yeah, exactly that, sticking it out in the, yeah, like you say, building new capabilities that excites people's attention and excitement leads them to be able to use or have some momentum to use those capabilities. But yeah, it always feels to me too like there's something missing, that we don't see quite all of them going all the way, and everyone struggles with this. But yeah, any role models or something you point to?
To me, yeah, it's hard because like all of these communities, they go up and down, right? Like I'm Algorand and like the Ethereum Foundation, and you look at like Avalanche for a while was doing all sorts of crazy stuff, and it was good. but like it really is also very cyclical for them. Like they wait till the price is good and then they fund all sorts of stuff, and then like the price is bad and then they like starve everybody to death, and you can't keep people going that way. So I guess the only advice I have is like consistent funding, even if it's less funding than you wanted to give, like consistent funding, making sure that you can keep people alive out there is really, really a big deal. That's a very stupid piece of advice, obvious piece of advice, but it's pretty important.
I really want to ask about programmability. I feel like I have to contort this to somehow be about decentralization. It's not that hard for me to do that. It's about decentralization in the sense that it fits the broader theme of what Zcash can do that cements or leverages its role, as one component of, the full ecosystem. But I imagine, for example, the most likely good outcome is that Zcash ends up essentially providing this, valuable export of access to its shielded pool, which is then relevant for, ZEC, but other assets as well, stablecoins and stuff through ZSAs eventually. I mean, and then programmability generally, I think is inclusive of ZSAs and stablecoins. I mean, anyone excited about programmability doesn't, it probably also thinks of stablecoins as among the most important, things that you would do with the programmability. But yeah, Andrew, I wanted to call on you about this just because I saw your tweets about this recently, and I know you've talked about that a bunch before. I'm curious what you view. Either am I right that that's kind of the connection between Zcash and the rest of the ecosystem and what it provides? That's relevant, or really anything you want to
Yeah.
react to?
I mean, what in my mind, cryptocurrencies have three major metrics: privacy, programmability, and scalability. And right now, Zcash aces privacy, and programmability is pretty non-existent, and scalability not there, and with some allusions to and people plans. And I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that we can solve the scalability problem. Programmability is interesting. ZSAs, as you mentioned, I think they solve it's a very specific form of programmability, right? ERC20, as I understand it anyway, is ERC20 because it wasn't that the Ethereum blockchain did a network upgrade to support coins. They supported programmability and someone wrote a program and they called it ERC20. I don't know what ERC9, maybe ERC19 had a bug, or maybe it's something else, right? If programmability on a private blockchain is, as far as I know, has never been done, it's probably a very, very challenging problem. And so if we're tackling these specifics, a particular use case that we say, well, we can't do general programmability, but we can at least do tokens. We'll do ZSAs. Then that seems like a very tactful, reasonable approach to address a specific use case. I'd love to see programmability in general, though, because the promise of, especially when you think about ZSAs, so could I have a ZSA that represents the deed to my house? Or I would personally love to see the stock market become totally ZSAs on Zcash, right? What if I could own stock in companies or in mutual funds, but I don't have an intermediate brokerage company that has to hold them for me? What if I could do it and vote appropriately in those companies' polls, but people don't know how much I hold? I mean, there's some promising expansions of Zcash use cases if we could go that route, but ZSAs will only go so far. If you can get general programmability, the sky is the limit, right? And we don't necessarily need, the word escapes me, the companies that sit between you and your house when you're buying a house. What is that called?
What, brokers, escrows?
Yeah, escrow company. Yeah, like programmability takes away the need for escrow in a lot of cases. Not every case. When we interact with the real world, there's going to be real worlds and contracts and governments that interact, but you can do all sorts of amazing things with programmability. But at the same time, I think these things have to, like programmability and scalability, they might conflict with each other, right? Ethereum had programmability before they had scalability, and prices just to send a little bit of Ethereum were astronomical. It was absurd, right? And so I'm actually more of a fan of yes, I want Zcash to soar and I want everyone to use Zcash, but not yet. Let's get scalings fixed, and programmability carries the risk of increasing the utility of Zcash faster than our scalability can keep up. I'd love to see those things go up at an equal rate.
If I got it right, you're saying that you would prefer scalability before overcomplication that comes from adding programmability. And I guess you viewed like ZSAs as not full programmability, but reasonable as a stepping stone to it. Like all else equal, the ERC20 kind of thing that just implement programmability. ZSAs are then a special case. I mean, I guess this is most relevant to basically what happens after ZSAs and in terms of that, because those in their limited programmability form are are already at the right stage of progress. I guess then it's to the extent that further generalized programmability is in tension with scalability, it seems like you're saying you'd probably recommend the
Yeah.
scalability focus first.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily that we have to be able to scale to 1 million transactions a second before we add programmability, but we should at least have a high confidence path to be able to get there. Because what good is a cryptocurrency that can scale to 1 million transactions per second, but nobody uses it?
Yeah.
And Zcash is on the low end of use right now. So
Yeah.
a balance in all things, but programmability has the potential to dramatically increase utility. And I'd love to have a plan, at least a high confidence plan that Zcash can scale. My dream is that Zcash can scale to levels of Visa and MasterCard, right?
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. So that there's no reason not to use it.
Matt, did you see or otherwise hear of by any chance, maybe from Zuko's tweet, but the cool idea that Sean had and had earlier in his Zcon talk earlier in the week, that's like an approach for scalability of the nullifier set, like how to be able to discard
Oh,
nullifier sets
yes, I
because you
did
just
see
have,
something.
oh yeah. You
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
thought
yeah, I
on it
did.
yet?
Yeah. The one thing, and I don't want to say it because I'm probably wrong. I thought that the assembly of these nullifier proofs required some kind of centralized service or something, and that might be wrong. So that's why I don't want to say it here. But there was that one part I was like, how do these things get built? And that was where I'm not even, this isn't a criticism. It's literally, I just don't understand it well enough. So that's why I shouldn't talk about it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this oblivious syncing service. My read on it was that it could be like light wallet D, and that it's just something you do from your own full node to help
Then
you
it's
out,
great.
and you can
Yeah.
do it like that. But yeah, and it might end up
No, I
perhaps
think it's
that's
a great,
impractical. But
I mean, we have ZK. Let's use ZK, right? Like if this can make a problem go away, let's do it. I think it's wonderful.
yeah, recursively snark up our nullifier set so we don't have that linear growing baggage forever. Thought it was a cool idea.
Forever.
Okay. Um. I distracted myself with that. I had something specific to ask you to follow up on based on what Andrew was saying. Oh yeah, I mean, same kind of thing for programmability towards you. I'm curious what you think about um, that in terms of priorities, or yeah, I mean, and you must have observations about like Aztec and Deleo as well.
Yeah, so programmability, like doing Zcash, and then like the first thing is like how do we do programmability? And I, got into a lot of arguments with people about programmability is really important, and if not programmability, then then ZSAs in particular, we need ZSAs. And there were a lot of people who didn't believe in that. They felt like Zcash was about Zec and should just be about Zec and not all that other stuff, and I kind of agree with them on the programmability side, because you can't do everything well, and it's good just to focus on something well. But ZSAs have been really, really important to me. And I'm still not sure exactly what the timeline is for deploying ZSAs, but I think they're kind of a game changer. I hate to be corny, but they're a game changer for Zcash. And I wish I could have a time machine and make it happen like 3 years ago. So I think that's incredibly important. And go back to programmability. There are a lot. Programmability is really, really hard in zero knowledge. And I've been working with Alio, like that uses a different architecture. I know Aztec is doing something. It is a hard problem to make programmable privacy stuff, and it's fun as a research problem. It's fun as like a let's figure out how to technically deploy it problem. It is incredibly difficult, and so not inflicting that on the Zcash community is totally, in retrospect, very reasonable. But it is really cool that you could do like smart contracts and keep everything private. I like that that we're getting close to the point where we can make that happen.
Do you have any thoughts on what it would take to kind of finish a stablecoin or attract it? I almost view there being like two kind of paths, maybe which both kind of go, but one was on the side of first of all, basically having in the in the ZSA implementation the ability to appease centralized issuers of stablecoins who then want some kind of more fine-grained control over traceability of some kind seems like a deal breaker for centralized issuers. Centralized issuers are the most desirable from just solve the problem and get people using it approach to stable coins. Purely algorithmic stable coins, I guess even collateralized ones with the bridge like Maker and Dai, are plausible as well. But I guess I suspect that to finish the whole, to arrive at stable coins on top of the ZSAs depends on ZSAs, no doubt, but I think it's going to take several other steps as well. But I wonder if you have any guidelines on what to do next or thoughts on that path.
Yeah, so first of all, I think if Zcash has stablecoins on it, the stablecoins should be as much as possible algorithmic stablecoins, because like the minute you're trusting a centralized stablecoin, you're trusting somebody not to like either freeze your altcoin supply. If you're bridging over from Ethereum, and somebody could freeze that instantly, and there's just too much risk, and I don't think it's a good idea. So they should be algorithmic stablecoins. They should be bridged over, and then whatever policies you implement should be Zcash-like, right? So as much privacy as possible. If you're over in the world where like you're working directly with centralized stablecoin issuers like like USDC and those folks, Paxos, there's a harder conversation to be had because the regulators have all these like requirements. They want to be able to see transactions, they want to be able to do stuff, they want to be able to freeze things, and like those aren't just like nice features that stablecoin issuers do for fun. They do it because they have to do it. And so if you're going to do centralized stablecoins on a chain, you have to figure out how many sacrifices you're willing to make. And like what I like about Zcash is it's not a place where we make sacrifices like that. So totally fine. If you are thinking about like your circle and you want to do this, and you've already taken it upon yourself to say, look, we have to have traceability, we have to have like a view key that we can see everything, we have to have something, then it's an interesting technical problem to figure out how that would work. And like I've been doing some regulatory compliance stuff, so I happen to have gone a little ways down that, but that is definitely not something that's going to come to Zcash, which means centralized stable coins are probably not going to come to Zcash either.
Desmond or Andrew want to reply anything on this
Yeah,
topic of stablecoins?
I'll just mention that from a decentralized perspective, I think anyone that wants to launch a stablecoin should be able to. But I do think that regulatory issues will be a huge problem. But also from a perspective of a new user, I do think the big benefit with stablecoins is that that's what most people are used to because they're used to spending dollars or their fiat currency where they're locally based. So there's an interesting poll there where the easiest for the user is the hardest for the engineering team in terms of regulations. It's weird. I wish it wasn't that way, but until more of society is comfortable using a ZEC instead of a dollar, that's always going to be the case, I'm afraid. So I do think that we should have some form of a stable coin, but I don't know how that looks yet. And I do think, to Matthew's point, we have to be exceedingly careful on how it's implemented and who and how and why. All the details will definitely matter.
I think if we, this is an area where I'm not well versed, but I mean, I'm aware of what happened in 2022 with Luna, which was an algorithmic stablecoin, and that burned badly. So I personally haven't recovered from that emotionally. Like, not that I was invested in it, but it kind of turned me off of algorithmic stablecoins. And so far, the centralized stablecoins like USDC and USDT, they haven't burned to the ground. Maybe we put too much faith in them, but they seem to be holding their peg. And so if we come up with a new kind of stablecoin or a better algorithmic stablecoin, great. I'm all for it. But in my opinion, we definitely need USDC and maybe USDT on Zcash as a ZSA as well, because the major exchanges know those, and ones like Coinbase guarantee a one-to-one trade. You go to Binance.us or something, and it's just free market, and so you don't actually get a one-to-one exchange. But USDC has that on Coinbase, and that's nice. And I'm very much a utilitarian when it comes to how are we going to get Zcash to really take off. It has to appeal to the masses, and right now the masses are accustomed to a dollar being a dollar being a dollar, or a peso being a peso, whatever it is. We need to appeal to the people who know how to deal with stable fiat currency, and ZSAs with reliable exchange rates to what they are used to is, I think, going to be critical to doing that. And if eventually we can wean them off of stable coins and into cryptocurrencies that can't be inflated by governments, et cetera, great. But even if we didn't do that, if all Zcash accomplished was anonymizing and privatizing fiat currency through ZSAs, that would still be a huge improvement in our social development as a species.
Do you have any thoughts on like I mean, where would you put Maker and DAI there? I mean, it's algorithmic in the sense that it's not single issuer. It still has a governance process that can do things, but it's the main thing is that it's like transparently collateralized. That's the thing. I mean, it's got collateral of different kinds in it, but it's closer to an algorithmic in the sense that there's not, a central issuer as such. It's still then like, DAO operated, but with transparent, showing of the collateral that backs it, which is not one-to-one with dollars, so it's denominated in dollars and then over collateralized with other digital assets.
Those sound like good things, and I don't know enough deeply about it to critique why Luna died, for example. But if algorithmic stablecoins give us what USDT and USDC don't give us, which is proof of collateral, then that sounds like a very beneficial thing.
Do you have a favorite application in mind that is a good example of programmability that's not and I sort of go back to decentralization after this, that's not stable coins, but beyond that?
No, I've none of them that I would want to quote here. I would love to see. There's so many little passing things like, oh, you know what, if I ran a business, or if I was a professor, I mean, there's so many things you could, and maybe some of this, to some extent, this would be like a ZSA, except it would be a worthless ZSA outside of its context. But I'm just imagining, what if as a college student, you were given, in exchange for your tuition, you were given rights to attend a class and also a certain number of hours with a tutor or a professor or a TA or something like that. And some smart students don't need it, and other students that are struggling could use twice as much. And you could create an economy where the professor says, look, I can spare 50 hours this semester in private tutoring. Each of you get 1 hour for free or as part of your tuition. And then they can start selling it around. And you could, through programming, this would probably not be built into a ZSA, but if you were programmable, you could say, these tokens that I give you attenuate over the course of the semester so that I don't get on the very last day, just before the final, everybody demanding their 50 hours, right? So you program in attenuation of these tokens. And that's just one possible real world application. I expect there are millions of, once people have the ability to do that sort of thing. And doing that in a private but provably trackable way can help even in that little scenario, right? The student that needs a lot of help can avoid a blockchain evidence of, I bought 15 people's time with the professor because I really, really need help. That shouldn't be public knowledge, but the professor can see that and say, okay, great. By helping you for 15 hours, I don't feel like you're monopolizing my time because 15 other people have given up their time with me.
I absolutely love these kind of applications that are like complementary currencies or self-issued assets. They're like, backed by something in a sense. If you say you're going to redeem them for your time, that kind of counts. It's like a form of collateral, it's of some kind, but different than what you see, normally. It would be really cool if Zcash is useful for an application like that. Let me ask a question that's not too far off from this, but maybe it's slightly more broadly, like what do you all, I guess I'll start asking this next, but probably anyone can jump in. But in terms of Zcash's role, what it provides to the other ecosystems that are useful, being anyone who has collateral and needs to put it into something like a stable coin would be able to, put it as liquidity for a Zcash based stable coin than a privacy stable coin if it works that way. I totally think it's plausible that Zcash essentially, by being able to join the, biggest anonymity pool on Zcash, that's kind of the, valuable thing that it provides, and, essentially would get, rewarded, have bargaining power by doing this for other cryptocurrencies. It had occurred to me that there could be other values as well. I mean, in a sense, I think Zcash's community being, quite strong and values oriented, and I think fairly, cohesive despite having a bunch of dev teams. The community as a whole does a decent job of vibing together. I would think that even just access to that community is something that's kind of valuable. Like I would imagine that other blockchains want to partner and ally with Zcash for ways that aren't just access to the anonymity set. Actually, maybe the relationship with Anoma and the Nomada airdrop, and then the joint things there are is a good example of that. It's clearly the case that Zcash provides this kind of, well, leaders in ZK, good educational partners and quality partners. Are there other roles, or what would you want to see Zcash's role in the ecosystem become?
Well, I think you bring up a great point on a social level. For example, I don't think I would have had another opportunity to talk with a PhD like you and Matthew unless I got involved in the Zcash community. So that's amazing to me. Like, and I get to through DAO, I get to interact with folks around the world in a using a smart contract, which theoretically could be ported to ZSAs eventually. For example, I'm not sure of the technicals there, but for me, I love the idea that privacy is a human right. So I like the idea that Zcash is bigger than just a blockchain for me. It's bigger than that, and it's like an interface to a deeper world, and I love that about Zcash. And some of the folks that I've met are amazing, and it's a bridge as well to other ecosystems, like you brought up, Namada, Penumbra. Like I basically learned of those ecosystems through the Zcash. There's no other way to put it. So there's value in that. Like sometimes it's really hard to put value on things, and this is a good example, in my opinion, of something that's invaluable. Really, good people. They want to learn. There's so much, and plus the folks that are in the community tend to be exceedingly smart, and again, that's another strength of the community. So that's my 2 cents.
Andrew, want to give any comment on what role you see Zcash playing in the broader crypto ecosystem or privacy advocacy ecosystem?
I don't have anything particularly refined. It's interesting to look at the history of Zcash as I understand, as I've heard it from. I don't know if this was Jack or Josh who explained it, but apparently Zcash's history includes offering it to Bitcoin. We wanted Bitcoin to have privacy, and they basically said Bitcoin is too relied on. We don't want to do anything experimental, so we went off and did Zcash. How do we feel about that now? Do we believe in the idea of private money enough that we would openly and willingly, and maybe we are already doing this, but because we're open source, but what if Bitcoin said, hey, you know what, we like ZK proofs now, we're just going to take Zcash and put it in and create an orchard pool right next to our transparent pool, which is Bitcoin. Would we, that might make Zcash completely irrelevant at that point, and the price goes to zero, and Bitcoin is worth a whole lot, and now it's got privacy. That's probably a win for the world, but it doesn't do much for rewarding the people who've been driving it and innovating it or being early adopters or whatever. So I don't know what to think of that. I think there's a lot of innovation that still needs to be done. And so it's valuable that I think Zcash has a lot of value already, and I think it has a lot of value that it can still contribute it. I'd love for the people who drove it forward to be rewarded for that. So I'd love for Zcash to be the cryptocurrency that survives. I don't know if that happens. It's probably going to be more of a diverse world than that. I saw somebody tweet earlier this morning about how we don't need programmability in Zcash because we have Ethereum and a lot of these other programmable blockchains for that. And Zcash will just be where you keep your money. And I mean, we could, but you lose privacy and you are subject to exchange rates when you hop blockchains. So I personally would love to see one blockchain deliver as many things as possible, but maybe some of those tensions like privacy and programmability or scalability will forever be trade-offs, in which case there's absolutely room for multiple cryptocurrencies. And we should share as much as we can with other blockchains without eroding what they do best.
The shielded pool as like a big anonymity set is kind of, unique in that way, because it's like the code, the circuit, pretty much all that can and has and will continue to be copied by other blockchains. That's just how that goes. But the shielded pool itself is kind of try to describe that in terms of excludable non-rivalrous. I mean, it is one anonymity set and then multiple fragmented anonymity sets, even if they have other separate advantages, still in some way are losing out on, being able to be consolidated into, better privacy through a larger anonymity set. Is just a anonymity loves company kind of, reasoning. So I still think that ends up being one of the cornerstones of like the unique value that Zcash would continue to provide. That's then complementary to what other blockchains would do. I guess yeah, by way of the question then to Matt, I mean, do you have any thoughts on anything you'd want to share on like what you think should be Zcash's role in the broader ecosystem along those lines?
Yeah, so I mean, things change all the time. So for years, I felt like Zcash should be the privacy, chain of the entire crypto ecosystem, right? Like there's so many other chains are afraid to build in privacy, and like sometimes you can get it through a smart contract, but we kind of saw what happened there. And with ZSAs in place and really good bridges being kind of an incredibly challenging thing to build, but really good bridges, you could use Zcash that way. And I still think it's possible that Zcash could have a role there. That's why I'm so excited about ZSAs and I want to see that there. And also like things go up and down. One day, like, there's no regulation and everything's great. Like we don't have any problem putting privacy or doing whatever we want. Then the next day, wait, the administration has changed and we now are terrified of putting privacy in places. Zcash has consistently built privacy and it's been a good thing. And so I think that we should lean into that, capability and provide it to people.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I am going to try to end the panel a little early. I think maybe I'll go around then with like a last, go for final remarks or anything you would want to add. Or we still, have the room for more time. So maybe one of you could throw a curveball of a question that we talk about. I wouldn't mind that. We could go down some of the questions. There were some posted, but I thought that most of them we had already answered a little bit directly. Okay, maybe before I try to do wrap up, one that wasn't answered is maybe Andrew, if you want to say more on what's opinionated about LibRust Zcash. This is now back to in the weeds, but
Sure, and I hope that's not an offensive term. I think I've even heard them say that themselves. The keepers of that repo, I think they've described it that way. But my impression has been they have a very fixed idea of what it should look like and how it should behave, and it's not necessarily a consistent idea. Depending on who I'm talking to, they have different ideas of how they'd like it to evolve. But requests that I've made for exposing certain APIs have been rejected on the basis of, well, an app shouldn't be storing private keys. They should only be doing seed phrases. And then they shouldn't be storing it anymore. It should all be in the database, and that's part of LibRust. They're basically forcing an app to use this LibRust Zcash crate in a very particular, very specific way, which, for example, that opinion and opinionated crates are good. They make it really easy to pick up and just use and know that you're doing best practices. And I think that's their incentive, is they don't want to give a whole bunch of powerful tools to a bunch of newbie developers and have a whole bunch of terrible Zcash programs written that don't preserve privacy, right? So there is value there. And so having opinionated crates is good, but the power shouldn't be in the opinionated crate. It should be in all of the other crates. And you, by all means, push forward the opinionated crate saying this is everything in the kitchen sink. It's safe to use. We only have a few APIs, so you can use it properly, very easily. And if you're an advanced developer, you know what you're doing, or you really want to do something off the wall that we didn't think about, all of the power is still there if you just reference these 15 crates and you get more APIs that way, et cetera. I'd like to see more of that. Whereas right now, LibreZcash has a lot of the, there's so much valuable glue code in LibreZcash that I can't imagine building an app using the individual smaller crates. It would be way, way too much work. And yet, sorry, like a lot of Zcash wallets out there today don't export seed phrases, they export private keys. And so I need to be able to import a private key. And for a long time anyway, I think this has been solved now, because I've been following LibreZcash for a few years. But for a long time, you couldn't import a private key. Okay, well, then I can't use LibreZcash, and that means I'm forced to use some other wallet developer's private library, which may not have been audited or might have bugs that they're unwilling to fix, et cetera.
If there's clear enough things, I mean, does being able to fork and add a patch that's then easy enough to keep maintaining upstream work for, specific additions to that? I mean,
Yeah, and that's what I've done. I've got a fork of LibreZcash myself, but the problem is I want to be a good community member, and the value that I add to my fork, I'd love to merge upstream. But by the time the few that I've managed to actually get merged upstream look very different than I had originally written them. And granted, I'm not a very advanced Rust developer, so to a large extent, that's probably just, well, I don't know how I'm supposed to do it properly. But there is absolutely an element of, well, that's just not the way we want to do it in this crate. Which, as a maintainers, that's absolutely their prerogative. It's something of a centralized, when there's only 2 or 3 developers that get to approve, and you have to have 2 of them approve for anything to go in, you very much have to make a very small centralized body of people happy to be able to make changes. And if I don't, to the extent that I have unique value in my fork, all of that is risk that eventually I'm going to have a merge conflict and I'm not going to be able to keep current with the latest things, which in a cryptocurrency financial software, it's very important that you merge regularly from upstream, so you have security fixes, whatever new feature is required for the next network upgrade. Like, those things are pivotal. So it's very hard to keep a fork of the Zcash code. And I've had multiple conversations with folks like the Za at Zingo about how could we do this reasonably to improve the code flow and innovation at Zcash from a app level perspective. So we wouldn't mess with the zero knowledge proofs. We just want to improve the wallet apps that we create. And by the way, by way of introduction, I wrote the Zcash wallet. So I've got some stake in the game, although it's probably not used by that many people at this point. It's tough.
Okay, perfect. I appreciated that explanation. Okay, I mean, the last proof of question that I want to address, it's good for, the kind of graphic up then basically is, how would you explain decentralization to someone new to the Zcash community, and what do you have as, that as a value? So I guess either I'll call on each of you, either respond to that question, or I guess if you want to say something else as last remark, maybe go for it there. How about I call on Dismod first for this?
Sure. I would say, like, decentralization is it's just it's in a sense it's friction, right? It's different opinions, it's different ideas, and I think that's what makes decentralization interesting, because uh, as much as as good as it feels sometimes to be part of the herd, there's an alternative viewpoint, and that is being outside the herd. Not only do you get a different perspective, it shines an angle that you can learn a lot of stuff. So decentralization in terms of Zcash, um, it's a window into um, privacy. It's a window into learning some crazy math, zero knowledge proofs, algebra. It's all there. It's a window into programming. It's a window into governance. For instance, the community governance is a hot topic, and it will become increasingly hot in the coming year. We need to decide how we're going to spend the lockbox funds, for example, and not only how, but how are we going to measure the a quote unquote social consensus. Are we going to use coin voting? Are we going to use the Zap? Are we going to use maybe a vote from ZconVI? The answer is no one actually knows, and I think that's decentralization. Like, no one actually knows the answer, and we got to come together and form an opinion. So it's an exciting time for Zcash, and I think to say that there hasn't been radical change in the last year and a half is crazy, because there's been, I think we're still as a community like kind of coming to terms with everything that's happened. There's so much has happened, and I'm super excited for what's coming next. And that is my 2 cents on decentralization in Zcash land.
Love it. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, besides just being really intrigued by the lockbox and how unique that is, I don't know of any other blockchain that's kind of clawed back its development, presumed development fund in order to hold it back and demand more specific proposals and performance even from the core dev community. Is pretty unique to Zcash. I'm also really intrigued by this ARETA proposal. I mean, it's early, but I like the idea of getting external governance support from professionals who have done governance consulting for lots of other fellow travelers in the blockchain space. So I like that kind of thing, and I'm optimistic for that. Matt, you want to offer last thoughts you want to bring up, or answer the prompt of how you would explain decentralization values to someone new to Zcash community?
Oh wow. Okay. I'm not sure which one I want to do. Yeah, maybe instead of answering that, I think I will just say that like one of the best things about Zcash is it's always had an incredibly enthusiastic community, and I think that's what makes it more decentralized than other projects. It's not just a bunch of whales pushing around. It's like actually people who care about this whole problem space and care about this whole system. And I think that's the best part of the decentralization of the community, is there are all these people who care. And I just want to say one thing, like we talked about, I don't really care what people do, if you want to do coin weighted voting or if you want to do something else. But I hope that whatever it is doesn't ruin that community of lots of people. Like, I hope it doesn't turn into something where just a few people with tons of money, like a few people with tons of money voting might be great. Maybe like they'll just care about the price of Zcash and like everyone will get rich. Good for them. But I would be very disappointed if the decentralization of the community aspect was to get hurt by all that. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
Awesome. Andrew, you want to close off with your explanation of decentralization to new community members, or anything else you want to bring up?
Sure. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, because everybody who's watching this cares deeply about decentralization and is spending time learning and suggesting how to solve it. What grates me is when a whole bunch of people might buy Zcash, or and then moan and whine about the price not going up, and it's centralized, blah blah blah. Maybe the highest level, simplest thing we can say is, to improve decentralization, contribute, get involved, because I haven't ever heard anybody say that they don't welcome involvement and contributions. There are problems and there are bottlenecks, and that's for me the most concerning thing is when you want to get involved and it's challenging to do so. So maybe that would probably be a good way to end from my perspective. I'd love to see some of those bottlenecks improve, and maybe, I don't remember if it was Dismod who commented on this, but if we were to divide up responsibilities of the Zcash crates, because if the core of it, like ZK proofs or whatever, it's super critical to get that right. Anything that could cause a loss of funds, then keep that in the most protected repo and let ECC manage it, for example. But the APIs that control wallets and other applications and front ends to this stuff, maybe ECC should cut that loose. Invite tons and tons of contributors and very quickly come to trust and give push permissions to those things, knowing that they're going to lose some control, but innovation and decentralization is going to grow significantly with that policy. That's an idea. I haven't thought that through thoroughly, but it's something I hope they'll consider.
Okay, perfect. All right. I'd like to wrap it up there then. It's ending a little bit early, but I think that's okay. I'm looking forward to the AV Club wrap up after this towards the end of ZCon. Yeah, since it's the last session, thank you all panelists for the time. Good getting to chat with you all, catch up with friends via the medium of podcast episode or live stream like this. And yeah, thank you organizers, Anika, Alex, yeah, everyone else for doing the AV for this. This has been great. Loved gonna talk about a bunch of the things that I've enjoyed of this at that wrap up later. So yeah, I'll wrap up here. All right, thank you all.
Thank you for our time, everyone.